Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. I hadn't expected much from that Sunday. It had started like any other, a quiet breakfast, the slow hum of the dishwasher, and sunlight trickling through the kitchen blinds. I had my feet tucked under me on the worn armchair, flipping through a book I wasn't really reading. My mind was elsewhere, drifting the way it often did on slow weekends. That's when the knock came at the door. 3 soft raps, almost uncertain. I didn't even have to look. I knew that knock. It was James. He was married to my oldest friend, Marianne. They'd been together for over 2 decades, the kind of couple everyone assumed would be forever. Marianne was vibrant and full of life, always organizing, always moving. And James? Well, James had always been her opposite. Quiet, thoughtful, steady. The kind of man you didn't really notice at first, but once you did, it was hard to forget the way his eyes lingered a second too long when you spoke. We used to talk more years ago, when the 3 of us would sit out on my back porch after dinner with glasses of wine, trading stories under the stars. But those nights had grown rare. Life moved forward, routines took over, and quiet connections were buried under busy schedules. So when I opened the door and saw him standing there, holding a paper bag of croissants and a hesitant smile, my heart did a small, traitorous flutter. I was in the neighborhood, he said, scratching the back of his neck. Marianne's visiting her sister in Vermont this weekend. Thought I'd stop by. He held up the bag like it was a peace offering. And in some way, maybe it was. Coffee? I asked, stepping aside. Always, he said, his smile easing into something warmer. We'd moved into the kitchen, the same space that had hosted so many memories with them both. He set the croissants on the counter while I busied myself with the coffee maker, pretending my fingers weren't shaking just a little. He sat at the table, leaning back, watching me the way he used to. Not in a flirtatious way. No, James had never been that kind of man. It was more like he was studying the moment, letting the silence stretch between us until it felt almost sacred. "It's been a while," he finally said. "It has," I replied, pouring the coffee. "You look good." "So do you," he said, and it wasn't just polite. His voice had a softness that I wasn't prepared for. We talked about small things at first. His job, the new roof I was having installed, how fast time was passing. But as the minutes slipped by, the conversation drifted to quieter places. "I still think about that night," he said suddenly, his eyes not quite meeting mine. I froze for a moment, cup halfway to my lips. "Which one?" He gave me a look, and I knew exactly which one he meant. It had been years ago. A stormy evening when Marianne had been out of town and James came over to fix my broken sink. We'd ended up talking for hours, just the 2 of us, as rain drummed steadily against the windows. And somewhere in the hush of candlelight and shared laughter, a moment had passed between us, an almost kiss, charged and trembling, that we both chose to step back from. We never spoke of it again. Until now. "I think about it too," I said more quietly than I intended. He nodded slowly. "I always wondered what would have happened if we hadn't stopped." I finished. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked down at his coffee, swirling it slowly. "It wasn't just attraction," he said. "It was something else, something deeper." His voice caught a little on the last word, and I felt my chest tighten. "I know," I whispered. "I felt it too." There was a long pause between us, thick with everything we hadn't said over the years. "I don't regret stopping," he said, finally meeting my eyes. "But I've never stopped wondering. I wanted to reach for him. I wanted to touch his hand, just to feel something solid between us, something grounding. But I didn't move. Neither did he. "It's strange," I said, "how life lines us up next to someone, so close, and still we stay apart." He gave a small, sad smile. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe some connections are meant to stay unspoken." "Maybe," I said, but my voice didn't sound convinced. We talked for hours, the sun shifting across the floor as the day moved on. At one point, I refilled our coffee and added a splash of cream to it just the way he liked it, something I hadn't done in years but still remembered without thinking. When he laughed at something I said, the sound reached a part of me that had gone quiet lately. And when he grew thoughtful, when his fingers tapped against the mug and his eyes softened, I saw the man beneath the husband, beneath the friend, the man I'd once almost fallen for. And maybe, in some quiet way, still had. As the afternoon waned and the shadows stretched long across the floor, James leaned back in his chair and let out a breath. "I should probably head home," he said, but there was reluctance in his voice. "You don't have to rush." "I know," he said, "but I should." He stood slowly, and so did I. We lingered near the door, neither of us quite ready to cross that final threshold. I opened it anyway, the cool air brushing against my arms like a reminder of the outside world. James stepped out onto the porch, then turned back. "I meant what I said," he said quietly. "There's a part of me that still wonders." I nodded, my throat tight. "Me too." And then for a moment, it felt like the universe paused. He leaned in, not to kiss me, but to rest his forehead gently against mine. Just a breath of contact, a whisper of closeness, before he pulled back and walked down the steps. I watched him until he disappeared around the corner. And then I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, heart full of something I couldn't quite name, something tender and aching and quietly beautiful, something that would linger, something that would grow. The days after James's visit unfolded like pages from a familiar book I hadn't touched in years, scattered memories rising with each breath I took. I'd walk into the kitchen and still see the imprint of his coffee mug on the table. I'd sit on the couch and remember the way his voice softened when he spoke of things he rarely said out loud. His presence had lingered, not just in the house, but in me. I hadn't heard from him since. No call, no message. But I didn't take it as distance. I knew James well enough to understand that silence, for him, wasn't avoidance. It was reflection, and I was doing the same. I'd known Marianne since college. We'd shared everything: dorm rooms, heartbreaks, first apartments. We were more than friends. We were history. And that's what made the feelings I had no place for all the more complicated. But those feelings didn't come out of nowhere. They had grown in small, unnoticed places, shared laughter over dinner, a knowing glance across a crowded room, the way he'd help me carry heavy boxes without being asked. And maybe it wasn't about James as much as it was about something he stirred in me. A part I'd quietly buried for years, something tender, feminine, alive. I found myself tidying up more than usual, rearranging the books in the living room, changing the sheets, even though no one would see them. It wasn't about preparing for another visit. It was about preparing myself to feel again. It was 3 days later when I saw his name flash on my phone. "Are you free?" That was all the message said. I stared at it for a long moment before replying. "I am." 20 minutes later, he was at my door again. This time, no bag of pastries. Just James, hands in his coat pockets, a look in his eyes that said he hadn't stopped thinking either. We didn't go into the kitchen this time. I led him to the living room. We sat on the couch, inches apart, and I turned off the television even though I hadn't been watching it. I wasn't sure if I should come, he admitted. I wasn't sure if I wanted you to, I replied honestly. He smiled gently. And I still don't know. He looked down at his hands, then back up. I just wanted to be near you again, even if it's just for a little while. The words sank into me like warm rain on dry soil. We sat in silence for a while. It wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like something sacred, like the space between words in a poem. You ever wonder what life would have been like if things were different? He asked. All the time, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He turned slightly toward me. When Marian and I got married, I thought I had everything figured out. But life, it shifts. It doesn't always ask permission. I know, I said. Sometimes it pulls you toward people you didn't expect. James nodded. It's not about dissatisfaction. I love her. I always will. But with you, it's... He paused, searching for the right word. It's deeper, quieter, like a current running beneath everything. I reached over and placed my hand on his. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental. I don't want to hurt her, he said, his voice rough. Neither do I. And I don't want to lose you. I squeezed his hand gently. Then don't. He looked at me with a tenderness that made my chest ache. What does that mean? What do we do with this? I don't know, I said truthfully. Maybe we just feel it. Let it exist, without forcing it into something it's not. He nodded slowly. You think that's enough? For now, it has to be. He looked down at our hands, intertwined now, and smiled faintly. It's strange. I feel like I'm 15 again. Nervous. Like I don't know what comes next. Maybe that's the point, I said. Maybe we're supposed to feel a little uncertain sometimes. He leaned back, eyes closed, and we sat like that, two people sharing a truth they couldn't quite name in a world that wouldn't quite understand. Outside, the light was starting to fade, the golden hour. Everything looked softer, warmer, more forgiving. I looked at him, his features bathed in amber, and thought to myself, this wasn't about regret. It wasn't even about longing. It was about being seen, really seen. And in that moment, I think we both felt it. He stayed for another hour, just talking. Nothing more. But when he left, he lingered at the door again, and this time, when he stepped forward, I didn't flinch. His lips touched my cheek, just once. Light, respectful, but it sent a ripple through me that I wouldn't forget. Take care of yourself, he said. You too. And then he was gone again. I closed the door gently, pressed my fingers to the place on my cheek where he kissed me, and let the quiet wrap around me like a memory. Some connections don't need labels. They just are. The morning after his visit, I found myself watching the sunrise through the living room window, wrapped in a throw blanket with a lukewarm cup of tea in hand. The sky was layered in soft pinks and lavender streaks, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I needed to fix or analyze anything. I just sat, quietly aware of the shift that had taken place inside me. James hadn't crossed a line. Neither had I. And yet, everything between us had changed. It's funny how one conversation can unearth feelings you thought were long buried. Old memories resurfaced like pressed flowers found in a forgotten book, moments I didn't even realize I'd been keeping. The way he used to glance at me when Marianne wasn't looking, the way his voice softened when we talked one-on-one. I always told myself it was just friendship. but maybe friendship can carry deeper undercurrents, too. Later that week, I ran into Marianne at the grocery store. She looked vibrant, her usual flurry of motion and chatter. She hugged me tight, her perfume warm and familiar. We talked about mundane things, organic lettuce, weekend plans, her sister's new puppy. And all the while, I watched her speak, nodding, smiling, feeling both guilt and affection coil tightly inside me. "You know," she said, pushing her cart forward, "James mentioned he stopped by your place the other day." My heart skipped. I kept my expression casual. "Yes, he brought croissants." She grinned. "He's terrible at surprises, but he tries." There was nothing accusatory in her tone. No suspicion, just the ease of someone who trusts completely. "He said it was nice to catch up," she added. "He misses those nights we used to spend at your place." I nodded. "So do I." She looked at me then, really looked. "You doing okay?" I smiled gently. "Yeah, I am." And I wasn't lying. Not fully. There was an ache, yes, but also a kind of warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. A reminder that I could still connect, still feel. That I hadn't gone numb after all. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. An actual letter, handwritten, addressed in James's familiar, tidy script. It surprised me, even made me laugh a little. Who sends letters anymore? Inside, the paper was cream-colored, the ink slightly smudged in places. His words were careful, deliberate, like each one carried a piece of himself. "I've been thinking about what you said. About letting it exist. You're right. I don't know where to place this feeling, but I know it's real. And I know it means something. I'm not asking for anything more. I just wanted you to know I carry it with me, too. You reminded me of something I'd forgotten, that connection doesn't always have to lead to something physical. Sometimes it's just about feeling understood. Thank you for giving me that. Yours, James." I reread the letter several times, each time feeling a little steadier. He hadn't made promises. He hadn't crossed a boundary. He'd simply spoken from the heart. And I admired him all the more for it. Weeks passed. We didn't see each other again for a while. Life resumed its rhythm, but something inside me had shifted. I started taking long walks in the evenings. I called old friends. I started painting again, something I hadn't done in years. It wasn't about distraction. It was about rediscovery. James had held up a mirror to a part of me I'd forgotten. A version of myself that was still full of curiosity, still capable of connection and hope. One afternoon, as I was dusting the shelves in the guest room, I found an old photo of the three of us, me, Marianne, and James, taken during a summer barbecue. We were laughing, arms slung around each other's shoulders, the sun casting golden halos around us. I stared at it for a long time. There was no jealousy in me, no resentment, just a quiet knowing. I wasn't meant to rewrite history. I wasn't meant to undo what they had, but I was meant to feel something again, to remember that I was still part of this world, still capable of stirring someone's heart, even if only in a fleeting, bittersweet way. The next time James and I crossed paths, it was at a neighborhood fundraiser. He was with Marianne, and I was chatting with another neighbor near the raffle table. Our eyes met across the room, and in that moment there was no guilt, no longing, just a mutual understanding, calm and respectful. He gave me a soft smile and a nod, and I returned it. Sometimes we carry people in quiet places, not as regrets, not as secrets, but as gentle reminders of who we were, who we still are, and who we've yet to become. That night, after the fundraiser, I sat on the back porch with a blanket around my shoulders and a glass of red wine in hand. The stars were scattered generously across the sky, and the distant sound of crickets pulsed like a quiet lullaby. I watched the night unfold in silence, feeling something rare: peace. It's strange, the way life circles back, the way unresolved feelings return not to haunt you, but to guide you toward a truth you hadn't been brave enough to face. James had been that truth for me. Not a temptation, not a mistake, just a deeply human connection that reminded me what it felt like to be seen. I hadn't felt that way in a long time. Not since my divorce, not since the quiet departure of romance from my life. And I hadn't even noticed how much of myself I'd shelved in the process, how the woman who once laughed too loudly, who cried over movies, who used to hum while folding laundry, had been replaced by someone quieter, smaller, dimmed. But James's presence, his honesty, the depth in his eyes, had nudged something awake in me. Not to stir chaos, not to append anyone's life, but to say, simply, "You're still here." A few days later, I wrote him back, not to rekindle anything, not to complicate his world or mine, but because it felt right to return the gesture. "Dear James, thank you for your honesty, your gentleness, and for reminding me that emotional connection still matters, that it can exist without conditions, without a future plan, without crossing a line, just for the sake of being felt. What passed between us that day wasn't wrong. It was real. And I will always hold it with care, not regret. You saw me. And I saw you. And I think that's more rare than we realize. I wish you love. I wish you stillness when the world is loud. And I hope in quiet moments you know you're not alone in what you carry." With warmth. Me. Didn't expect a reply, and I didn't need one. Weeks passed, then months. I saw James and Marianne from time to time, at birthdays, neighborhood get-togethers. Nothing ever felt awkward. If anything, we were kinder with our eyes, gentler with our words. James and I shared glances now and then, fleeting but meaningful. Not with tension, not with regret, but with acknowledgement. We'd both chosen not to act on something, and in doing so, we'd preserved more than just our dignity. We'd preserved respect. And perhaps that mattered most of all. As time moved forward, I found myself craving connection in other places. I joined a local art group. I started volunteering once a week at a literacy center. I met new people. I laughed more. I even caught myself humming while folding laundry again. Something had shifted in me, quietly but permanently. Love doesn't always arrive the way we expect it to. Sometimes it walks in wearing familiar shoes and brings croissants on a Sunday morning. And sometimes it doesn't stay. Sometimes it simply touches you once, deeply, and walks away. But that doesn't make it any less real. And in the end, maybe that's what matters most. Because love, in its many forms, reminds us who we are, who we can still be. And if we're lucky, it leaves us softer, wiser, and braver than we were before. I'll always remember that quiet conversation, that unexpected visit, that almost forgotten feeling. And I'll carry it like a whisper, warm, bittersweet, and beautifully mine.